Hello everyone and welcome to today's video tutorial on criminal law. Today we're going to be looking at how to apply the law on actual bodily harm, or ABH, from section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act to a criminal scenario. This is the little example or mini scenario, I'm calling it, that we're going to look at today. And you can see here that this is a lot shorter than the length of scenarios that you're going to get in the real exam. However, the technique that we're going to use, the idea framework, which I'm going to talk you through, is exactly the same no matter what the length of your scenario is. Now, ABH, applying this to a scenario, is quite challenging and students often find it quite tricky. And the reason for that, if I just jump back a slide to this one, this is just a mind map summarising the law on ABH, or section 47. The reason it's quite tricky to apply is if we remind ourselves of the actus reus of the offence. To be guilty of a section 47 ABH, you need an assault or a battery, you don't need to have both, but you need an assault or a battery which has caused actual bodily harm. So to be able to apply the law on ABH, not only do you need to know what ABH is, you also need to know the law on assault or battery and to be able to recognise which of those has potentially caused actual bodily harm. But that can make it quite challenging, so we're going to have a look at a scenario today which hopefully will help you to feel better prepared for answering this in the exam. So here's our scenario then. We've got a little mini story, if you like, involving two characters, Lucy and Dan. And the scenario is Lucy sends Dan a threatening email saying that she's going to petrol bomb his house. Dan is so frightened that he suffers PTSD, or that stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, if you're unsure. And you're being asked to advise Lucy on her criminal liability. Now you can see on this slide I've already highlighted some of the key issues here which I've recognised in the scenario. And that's a really good tip for you when you go into your exam, whether you're looking at criminal law, contract tort, whatever the area. If you're looking at a scenario, I would always recommend that you read through it slowly first, and then go back over it with your highlighter and pick out terms that are helping give you a clue as to what you should be applying. And I've recognised by highlighting these issues that it's potentially ABH that Lucy's committed. And the reason for that is we've got a threatening email. Dan's frightened, so at the moment, when you just see threatening email and frightened, hopefully you're thinking assault. That sounds like an assault. But you can see here that he's suffering from PTSD. So he's got an injury. Okay, if it's an assault, there's typically no injury. Okay, it would just be threatening email that's frightened someone. That could be an assault. But because we've got this injury, we know that we need to be applying the law on ABH. So let's have a look then at how you should go about doing that. So on this slide, I've gone through the idea framework, which I mentioned at the start, and this is the structure that I always advise students to follow when answering any scenario at all in law. And you can use this idea framework whether you're looking at criminal, whether you're looking at tort, contract, it doesn't matter, we can still use this same structure. And if you remember from our previous videos, IDEA stands for identify, define, explain and apply. And if you follow these steps through, you're much more likely to get high marks, you're less likely to miss out important information that the examiner needs. So let's have a look at these steps then. So we have to identify what the potential offence is. And when we looked at the previous slide, we saw that it's potentially ABH because we saw what looks like an assault resulting in an injury. So for my identification, I've said Lucy might have committed ABH under section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 when she sent Dan a threatening email which caused him to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So you can see there I've identified for the examiner clearly who the defendant is, who the victim is, what the offence is that I think they might have committed, and also I've pointed out the injury as well. And that's a really useful thing to do, because I'm telling the examiner already, really, I'm indicating that I think it's section 47 because we've got this post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's all you need to do for your I. You're just literally identifying what the offence is that you think might have been committed. Your next step in the idea structure is D, and D stands for define. So this is where you've got to define, give the full legal definition of whatever offence it is you think has been committed. So here we need to define section 47 ABH. And to do that, you would start by saying the actus reus of section 47 is, the mens rea of section 47 is, and you would write that out. And then we're into E. And E stands for explain. And this is where you're going to explain the definition that you've just given in the step above. So you would start by explaining the actus reus of section 47, and then you would explain the mens rea of section 47 in order to explain ABH fully. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that ABH is quite tricky to apply. Students often find it quite challenging because that we know for the actus reus there must have been an assault or a battery. Now, in the exam, you're not going to have time to explain everything about assault and everything about battery and everything about ABH if you're applying the law on section 47. So what you need to do here is to say that the first part of the actus reus is that there must have been an assault or a battery. Now, I would explain assault or battery here, and I would explain whichever one I thought it was that had led to the section 47 ABH. So in our scenario, because I think it's an assault, because there was an email, there was no contact, there was a threatening email, it's potentially an assault, which has then led to ABH. So I'd be explaining what assault is, and then I'd explain ABH. If, however, the scenario was Lucy had punched Anne in the face and left a very small bruise, in that case I would be saying the first part is there must be an assault or battery, I'd explain battery, and then I'd explain ABH. And then the final stage is A, which stands for apply. And apply is where you're going to apply all of the elements that you've explained to the characters in your scenario. So we'd need to say whether the actus reus of the assault or battery has been met. Of course, we're looking at assault in our situation. Say whether the mens rea of the assault or battery has been met. Again, we'll be looking at the mens rea for assault. Say whether the assault or battery has led to ABH, and this is where you'd need to discuss the injury, in our case, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then say whether our defendant, in this case Lucy, has the mens rea for the assault or battery. Now, what I've done on the next slide, it's quite busy, I'm afraid, but I've gone through an abbreviated bullet point answer to that mini scenario. And you can see I've also highlighted the idea steps, the I, the D, the E and the A. And for ease, I've colour-coded it. So everything to do with actus reus is green, everything to do with mens rea is blue. So I, we already mentioned on the last slide, but that's the straightforward bit. We've identified that Lucy may be liable for assault occasioning ABH under section 47 when she sends an email to Dan causing him to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm then going to define section 47. The actus reus of section 47 is an assault or battery occasioning ABH. The mens rea is, that stands for intentional recklessness. Intentional recklessness as to whether our victim apprehends or is subjected to unlawful force. Sorry, just ignore these little ones on this slide. I use this in class as a rough mark scheme for my students, so you can just ignore that. So we've defined it. We're then going on to E, where we're going to explain the law, and you can see that I've explained that our defendant must have committed an assault or battery. I would have given the full actus reus and mens rea of assault, so an act or words causing the victim to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force with intentional recklessness as to whether such apprehension was caused. And then I'd want to be elaborating on that using cases that are important. I'm then talking about the actus reus part of ABH. So once we've got an assault or battery, we need it to have caused ABH, and Miller's a useful case to use here because Miller said that ABH means any hurt or injury calculated to interfere with the health or comfort of the victim. So it can be quite a low level of injury to be ABH, and it's useful to give some examples here. So various cases have shown different things. So loss of consciousness, even momentarily, can be ABH. Cutting somebody's hair, psychiatric injury, Chan-Fook. Now, for our particular scenario, PTSD, hopefully Chan-Fook sprang to mind because we've potentially got that psychiatric injury there. And at the last bit of my explanation, I've explained the mens rea that I need. Our defendant must intend or be reckless as to whether the victim fears or is subjected to the unlawful force. Please note that for ABH, the mens rea is that they have to fear or be subjected to unlawful force. They don't need to intend or be reckless as to whether ABH is caused. Some students incorrectly write that. It's intentional recklessness as to whether the assault or battery is caused. And then we're on to the final stage because we've identified, we've defined, we've explained, we now need to apply it back to our characters. And this is where your plan's really helpful because you can see here that if you've gone through it in these steps, you can look back at your explanation and simply apply everything that you've explained in order back to your character. So obviously you're going to be writing in nice full sentences, but I've abbreviated here. Lucy meets the actus reus of assault because an email can be an assault. Constanza would support that. We can say that it's going to be imminent because, of course, with it being an email, the issue is going to be, is it immediate enough? Well, we can say that it's imminent because Lucy could potentially, for all Dan knows, have sent that from a mobile phone right outside his house, and an assault can be through a window, it can be imminent. Smith and Woking would be useful there. We can say that Lucy also meets the mens rea of assault because she clearly intends to scare Dan. That's very apparent. The whole purpose of sending the threatening email was to scare him. PTSD can be ABH using Chan-Fook. Importantly, though, it must be recognised. So we need to be sure that this was diagnosed by a doctor. So we can see that Lucy's met the actus reus for ABH because there is an assault which has caused psychiatric harm, which is enough for ABH. So she meets the actus reus, and then applying the mens rea, we can say that Lucy is liable for ABH because there's a completed assault which has led to ABH, and she intended for Dan to apprehend the infliction of immediate unlawful force. We already sort of mentioned that with the mens rea. Lucy clearly intended to scare Dan. That was the whole purpose of the email. So therefore she meets the mens rea. She's also got the actus reus. So she's going to be guilty of a section 47 ABH. So I hope that was helpful to you. And hopefully by following that idea framework, you'll be able to answer any section 47 scenarios should they come up in the exam.